Good morning and welcome back to another
Good.
episode of Jeff and Gabe in Conversation.
That's right. In conversation.
In Conversation with Jeff and Gabe.
Sounds so
This is our
serious.
weekly, I know it's so serious. This is our weekly, usually weekly chat about stuff and things that we want to talk about.
Yeah. And you have to listen to
Today, you have to listen to it. You have no choice. We're going to try
Okay.
and bring some levity to the conversation today because it is going to be a heavy topic. And as you saw on my intro, please, if you need to take a break, if you're feeling triggered or just need some time to yourself, please do. Make sure that self-care comes first. Grab a box of Kleenex. As Gabe says, we will be discussing our experiences with grief, but also our recovery and resilience and so forth. So it'll be good. How
Yeah.
about we start off
Mm.
and we define and compare and contrast uh, real grief as defined in the real world and Scientology grief as defined in Scientology.
Okay.
You have the tech dictionary there, so um, let all the viewers know, what is grief in Scientology? What's it look like?
Well, there's 3 definitions, but I'm only going to give you the last one because the other ones are just like far too technical, and it's too early for me to get into technicalities here.
It's always too early with
Um,
Scientology stuff.
so it's definition number 3. Grief takes place where one recognizes his loss and failure, as in the death of somebody he loved and tried to help.
Mm.
Doesn't that suck?
It sure sounds like it's grief is because someone failed to help someone, and it sounds like it's blaming the person who's griefy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody who's going through grief, let's say when my mom died, sending hugs ahead of time, that's cute. Like when my mom died and I was already in Scientology and
Mhm.
she had cancer. So per that definition, I was crying because I failed to help my mom not have cancer. Like, that's
Mm.
so stupid.
Lots of Scientology is pretty stupid, but yeah, it's definitely victim blaming. Or maybe not victim is not the right word, but the person who's experiencing the emotion, which is a natural human emotion, is being blamed for being in that condition, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think
So
some people go through, um, like, "Oh, I wish I could have done more for them." Like that
yeah,
kind of thing, like maybe some guilt around it and stuff like that. But this is like, you failed to take responsibility for your mother's cancer, and that's why she died. Like,
yeah.
that's really, like, really and so that's the kind of mentality one would have, right? If you really took this definition of grief to heart.
Yeah. And just very briefly, like the solution for if you're feeling griefy in Scientology, if you've experienced a loss, is to go in session.
Mm,
And usually it'll involve what's an ARC break session, where
mhm.
basically it's a specialized type of auditing where you go over breaks in affinity, reality, and communication and understanding. So in the case of losing someone, it could be you're you have a break in the communication with that person, right? So
Yeah,
you,
'cause
you
they're
can no
no
longer
longer there to
communicate.
talk to you.
Yeah.
Duh.
Or if it was like a really shocking loss where it's like sudden, it could be
Yeah,
a break in reality. Like you don't have the reality of this being a thing, or
yeah.
affinity. Like how could that person leave me? Something like that.
Well, I mean, basically all you do is talk about it. You talk about all the different aspects in the on these little subjects about the person. But you're saying the command, 'cause I had it. I didn't actually have a loss of a person assist after my mom died, I don't think. No, I can't really
Mm,
remember. It happened a long time ago, but I did have one for my dog. But it's find something that doesn't remind you of the person. So
yeah.
when I lost my dog, it's like, find something here that doesn't remind you of Sherman. That was my dog.
Mhm.
And then that's repeated. And I believe it's actually called an assist.
Yeah, so that would be the loss of person assist, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you're
Yeah.
going into session, like, on the meter, you would be running air C brakes, as far as I understand it.
But I was also on the meter doing that.
Really? Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
I
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever had a metered assist before. I know they were a thing, but
Yeah.
I've always had them in the outside world.
Well, I
And
guess it's a
so
yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
oh, I was just gonna move on, but feel free to finish that thought.
How can you move on? I'm kidding.
Well, I'm just really good at dealing with his loss.
Oh god. Just move on. It'll all go away. Um, yeah, you can move on.
Okay.
I forgot what I was gonna
So
say, that's why.
perfect. And you know what? You could have not said that, but now everyone knows that the train has left the station. So grief in the real world, I'm gonna define it as per, an actual clinic that deals with this kind of stuff.
Mm,
So grief is the experience of coping with loss. Most
mhm,
of us think, of grief as happening in the painful period following the death of a loved one, but grief can accompany any event that disrupts or challenges our sense of normalcy or
mhm.
ourselves, which I think is an important point.
Yeah.
This includes the loss of connections that define us.
Yes. Ooh.
That opens a whole new world of conversation.
It's a whole new can of worms, and as soon as you said that when we were talking off air, it just it's like this whole sort of thing opened up for me and all the various like, when you're a Scientologist, that's your identity.
Mhm. Yep.
And when you become a non-Scientologist, that's you leave that identity behind or you lose it. There is a lot of loss and grief attached to all that stuff, especially in the case of somebody who was born into it. I mean, I spent
Yep.
26 years of my life, and that was hard enough. Um, 'Cause for me, Scientology, it was my career. It was my purpose.
Mhm.
So, no, and then it was my community. I identified as a Scientologist. Um, and yeah, there's the whole host of things, friends, community. It was a religion. I looked at it as that. So there was that loss. Um, and then, of course, when it came to disconnection, there was, my sister, and that's a whole other can of worms. Because after I left, she disconnected, and then a few years later, she died. So, that's a whole other set of losses there. Um yeah, and you have, like, a status when you're in the cult, right? Because my husband and I, we were donors. I we weren't top donors, I think we were kinda like middle tier donors.
Mhm.
So, you have a certain kind of respect in your community as well. I never thought of that part. Um isn't that interesting? You're just talking about that's why I like talking about this stuff, Jeff. It just
Yeah.
it's like a process. It takes you through and it makes you think about stuff that you would never really think about if we weren't talking about this. So,
It's an important part of this, and this is why we like to have these conversations. And you and I have conversations almost daily about stuff like this, right?
yeah.
Privately.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to have these conversations publicly because I know there are ex-Scientologists watching. there might be some actual Scientologists currently watching, and I think it's really important to put this out there to let people know they're not alone, right? As difficult as it is to put this stuff out publicly, um, it's why I do it. You
Yeah.
know, it's normalizing these conversations and making it okay if you
Mhm.
want to talk about it.
Yeah,
So,
and it's not easy to talk about. Like, I mean, I have to hold back to some degree because sometimes it just it stirs shit up. So, and I'm sure other people doing the YouTube stuff have the same thing. So,
oh yeah,
yeah.
we've seen it in many people's cases on the whole YouTube platform. I think an
Yeah.
important lesson is, and I've had to learn for myself, is knowing when to take a break, stop,
Yeah.
you know. So,
Yeah, and you don't know
um,
what trauma how your trauma will come out, and we've all experienced it. I mean, childhood trauma is the worst, and if you don't know or haven't had enough or addressed your childhood trauma, it comes out in all different ways: anger, hypervigilance, all sorts of stuff, and I think that is it's also important for us to talk about recovery too, which we do plan to in the very end, and all the things that we've done, and
yeah,
also to live. You have to live a little, right? You have to like because I mean, my life in the cult was was 7 days a week, nonstop. I didn't do anything else. I think we went on a few vacations, but you're just so absorbed in your day-to-day Scientology craziness that, and I mean, and it goes back to when my mom died. I never grieved over her.
mhm,
I never actually had this. I was just too busy. And that I think that's kind of like a coping mechanism that a lot of people use, not just in a cult or from a cult,
yeah.
but in the daily world where they don't deal with their grief, and then it comes out in all different and funky ways.
Yeah, I mean, people definitely do when they're dealing with, loss and grief, or not dealing with it, I should say. They do tend to try and distract themselves because it's uncomfortable feelings, right?
Mhm.
Like, and for some people, it comes very naturally. But for someone who grew up in Scientology or a similar, high control group that didn't allow you to stop and reflect and breathe, it doesn't come naturally. And so we tend to just engage ourselves in other things and ignore it, which brings me to one of the first myths that I would like to kind of go over and discuss
Mhm.
is the pain of the grief, the pain that you're experiencing will go away faster if you ignore it.
Yeah,
Not
no.
true, right?
Mm-mm.
Not
Yeah.
so trying to ignore your pain or keep it from surfacing, which is what I do all the time, will only make it worse in the long run. For real healing, it is necessary to face your grief and actively deal with it.
Right. And that is exactly what you do not do in Scientology. You do
Yeah.
not face your grief, you shove it aside, and or they do this pretend process that's supposed to take care of it all. You're done, carry on,
Yeah.
right? It's so
And
yeah.
it takes time. It
Yeah.
takes actions. It takes really facing it. Whereas Scientology just thinks that you can just say, "Oh, it's this," and then that's it, and just it's just gone, you know.
Yeah.
But that's not dealing with it.
No, and there's also a stigma that goes along with grief when you're in the cult because it's so low on the tone scale. And you have that in your mind. If I'm showing that I'm grieving or I'm crying or I'm feeling like low toned about the loss of a family member or a pet or something, um it's a bad indicator is what it's called, and you've got some issues going on, and that's a stigma. It means you're not I don't even know how to describe it. Like, I remember seeing somebody crying, and it was like, well, that's grief. That's actually not okay, right?
Mhm.
To feel that way. It's not you shouldn't feel that way, or this person needs a session. They've got some bad case phenomena going on, and they need a session. It's like you kinda regard them almost as pathetic.
Yeah.
Would
Well,
that be accurate?
yeah, I mean, let's take a look at where grief is on the tone scale.
Yeah,
So, I don't have a good high definition copy of it, so I'm not gonna show that one. It's very blurry, but
that's okay.
um, grief is very low toned or low on the tone scale. So it's a misemotion, which means it's an emotion which is reactive in nature. So it's your unconscious mind,
Yeah,
according to Scientology. And if you're operating in your reactive mind, you are um, your effect of things. So you're not being cause, which means you're not being OT, blah, blah, blah. So grief is point 0.5 on the tone scale. And looking at surrounding tone levels,
mhm,
right below grief is making amends, which means you've done something wrong and you're making up for it, right?
yeah.
Undeserving is point 0.3, so very close to grief. That's not a good thing. That's not a good way to feel. Self,
Undeserving. I don't
yeah,
deserve.
you don't deserve whatever.
Ew.
Self abasement, and then just below that is victim.
Yeah,
Directly above grief is propitiation. So you're trying to make up and like almost like sucking up to somebody to
that's
get
right.
some attention. And then right above that is sympathy. And so these are all like very negative connotation. Above sympathy is numb, which
Yeah,
makes no
yeah,
sense. But
yeah.
I also like to point out that the randomness of these numbers on this tone scale,
It's weird.
point 0.9 sympathy, 0.94
Yeah.
numb,
They're
0.96
just
terror. Like,
arbitrary numbers attached
yeah,
to it. It's so stupid. You
yeah.
know, I know a lot of people did the PTSSP course. I never did the PTSSP course from cover to cover.
I did.
My sister was ordered to do the PTSSP course, and she did it 3 times. So
Wow.
that kinda stuff was really, like, drilled into her head.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So it is a really bad thing, and I remember, I'm just gonna tell a little story here. When, I got out and I sort of made amends with my relationship with my dad, um, I didn't really feel like it wasn't like a conscious thing that I was making amends, but I was trying to make up for lost time because I didn't have a lot of time with my dad because he had a heart attack and stuff.
Yeah.
So he was getting older and I knew he wasn't he wasn't doing well. So I
Mm.
spent a lot of time with him and and in that time we became really good friends and stuff and then he passed away. I was visiting him in the hospital, like, almost every other day for, like, 6 months before he passed, and when he died tissue time.
It's okay.
When he died, I w see, there's still a lot of grief around it. When he
Yeah.
died, first of all, I was there when he passed, and but I had a really hard time with the grief because it was,
Mhm.
like, really, really heavy. It was, like, all day crying and stuff like that. I was still trying to function.
Yeah.
So, this went on for a number of months, and it was probably the first real, um, issue that I had after getting out of the cult where I didn't know what to do.
Mm.
Like, I had already shed all the cult stuff, it was like, that wasn't there to turn to, like the technology.
Yeah.
So I was just experiencing this grief, and I was telling my husband, it like, I don't know what to do. I can't stop crying. This is insane. And I knew it wasn't right. I did not know what to do with this issue. So, I went, well, I guess I'm gonna have to like turn to psychology and or like a counselor or something. And
Mhm.
it was really, really hard to actually get up the nerve to make a phone call. But this thing
Yeah.
was affecting me, like, in my daily life. It was really bad, and I was having, like, a lot of pain and stuff in certain
Mhm.
areas of my body. So I was a frickin' train wreck.
Yeah.
I finally went to a grief counselor, and it was like I drove past the place. I thought maybe I'll just call and cancel. There was all sorts of goofy stuff that I was doing because I was like, I'm going to a psychologist, somebody, and it was like this thing in my head with Scientology because they were so anti-psych. And not just anti-psych, but I'm spending my own money, and am I blowing my money eh, on something that is just bullshit, basically, right?
Yeah.
There are all
Yep.
these stupid things going around in my head. So I finally got there, and I'm super skeptical. I'm like, I really don't want to do this, but I'm going to try it anyway. So it was kind of like pushing myself to do it. This woman answers the door, and she's like totally funky looking. She's got these bright yellow glasses. She's got this scarf that's all different colors. And I was like taken aback by her. It's like, she doesn't look like a psychologist or a counselor or whatever,
Yeah.
right? On top of that, it was in her home. And that was like, red flag for me too. It's like, oh, that's kind of weird. She's doing it in her home. Is she like a murderer or something? Anyways, these stupid thoughts.
She's a squirrel, I bet.
She's a squirrel. It's like, oh my god. But so I did actually cancel one of the first appointment. So this is like a second appointment I made. So we're there, and she started doing her thing, her counseling. And it was a different kind of counseling. It wasn't just like the what was that called? The cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yep.
This was more like I was already crying as soon as I sat down in her
Mhm.
big comfy couch. Like, it was huge. I wasn't lying down. I was sitting. And I immediately started crying. She says, "Well, what can I help you with?" kind of thing, right? And I'm like, "Woo!" And
Blah, everything.
it was just like it was uncontrollable. It was just the strangest thing I've ever experienced. So we went
Yeah.
through this whole process of like feeling the grief in my body because I tense
Mhm.
up a lot. And so we the first session was like, okay, I can kind of get into this. But then I kept going, oh, this is kind of like Scientology. There was such a battle going on in my head, and just not and resisting so much when this
Yeah.
person was basically trying to help you, right? With anyways, I had gone back a third time, and that third time I had what I could only call like a release, what they call in Scientology. It's like
Mhm.
something moved off. And obviously there was some sort of relief from everything, right?
Yep.
And I I actually felt like I didn't have to cry. There wasn't that not a desire, the impulse, I guess, to stop
Yep.
crying.
Wow.
Anyways, that was like, oh, what an ordeal.
Sounds really powerful.
Yeah, but it's like you don't when you get out, you don't and you shed all this bullshit. You don't have anything to replace it. Like you don't, you can go on the internet and do the whole Mr. Google stuff, but when you're in a crisis and you're so, I mean, I get this was probably maybe 6 years after leaving, and I had
Mm,
not had any sort of counseling after that or really done any education, because it was get out of the cult, get your life together. Dad has a heart attack in the meantime. He's super sick. Um, so they're just, and of course there's so much resistance to any sort of, real counseling. So
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
on the back burner. And then this one incident of my father passing was just like it like brought the whole house down kind of thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a big moment.
It was a
I
big turning point.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm so glad that you got to experience that, and
Yeah.
I've experienced the similar, when I mean, for anyone who isn't familiar with my story, my father was the executive director of Citizens Commission on Human Rights, which is the anti-psychiatry, psychology, mental health unit front group in Scientology, and it was inundated in my head that psychology bad, all psychologists.
Mhm.
I remember one having a conversation a little bit later. I was in my 20s with my dad, saying, "How?" This is after I did the PTSSP course, by the way. So,
Of course.
um, how is it that all psychologists can be bad, right? And his answer was just, they just all are. And I never believed that.
Yeah.
I probably kind of felt, yeah, psychiatrists are bad,
Mm.
but like mental health workers, I never felt were all bad. There sure are bad ones, much like
Yeah.
any industry. There are bad actors, um, but like far and few between are really bad people, and most people just want to help. So I remember experiencing very similar to what you're talking about with going to see a counselor for the first time, and the sheer panic and the hurdles I had to jump over in my own mind to go see
Mhm.
this person,
Yeah.
and then also go see them again and again and
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
you know, because I would leave the session, I'll call it a session, therapy
Sure.
session, and I would feel like almost a disassociation,
Yeah.
um, where nothing was quite real to me. It was almost like I was floating through this weird different universe in a different area.
You were
I wouldn't
exterior.
describe it as I was just gonna say, I wouldn't describe it as being exterior, but it was just a different frame of reference for things, I think, and I hadn't really opened up any of this for myself prior to this. I had been offlines, I had been watching stuff on YouTube and, looking at data on the internet about Scientology and what happens and everything,
Yeah.
but I had never really opened stuff up for myself.
Yeah,
I've
you
always
kept it at
and
an
this
arm's
is an
length.
important Yeah, and this is a really important point for anyone who's watching who, is an ex-Scientologist or, a member of a cult or something where they've left, who is inflowing or intaking other people's stories, but not sending their own out in some form, and I'm not talking about being on the internet saying it, but to a counselor or a loved one, whatever.
Mhm.
It's a whole different animal when you actually tell your story. It's just different, and I highly recommend it to someone who's trusted to you. But it changes things in your own head.
Yeah.
I think it's
And
important. So
you make a really, really valid point, Jeff. In When you just sit um with your story, it just sort of mushes around in your head. Even when I just, I mean, I had like a sort of diary journal thing on and off after I got out, because
mm,
I was really sick when I got out of the cult with this Graves' disease thing. So I was
yeah,
kind of journaling food and more like a health thing. And then it started getting into um like thoughts and things like that, right? And I noticed then that this was therapeutic, that writing stuff down, getting it out of my head, was actually very helpful. It is one of the main reasons why I also told my story, because it just, I mean, it wasn't just to get it off my own chest, but it's like, "Hey, anybody out there experience the same thing? You know, listen to my story, and I hope it'll help you." And also, it's also a way to connect with people who are experiencing something similar, and you
Mhm.
can actually discuss it. And it's I mean, it's kinda like a group therapy thing, and,
Yeah.
um and it makes you feel like you're not alone. Like, Scientology isn't a big it's in the whole scheme of things, it's not like a really big thing. It's actually quite small when you look at it, but like, your own personal story and the damage that it's done, that's a big deal. So if you can find people to discuss that with and get some relief and, um, point yourself in the right direction kind of thing, right? Or at least feel a little bit better after a talk. It's
Yeah.
something. It's better than sitting there like I was in that grief thing where I couldn't stop crying, you know? I think we all wanna feel better. We all wanna have a happy life. So in whatever way I felt I could help, I which is why I started the channel, but and it's why I keep going, because A, it helps me, and B, I cross hopefully help somebody else, understand better what they're going through.
Yeah. I think it's
And I'm
important. Sorry, go ahead.
I said, and I'm and I know that having a channel on YouTube and talking about this stuff is not gonna take Scientology down. It just won't.
Nope.
I don't have that much of an impact, but it's a little bit. Our whole purpose when we were in the cult was to save the planet. Well, it ain't gonna happen. Right?
They're a
I
little
ain't
bit
gonna
behind.
Yeah, I ain't gonna save the planet.
Yeah. No, and we're not, and that's not the point of it. And honestly,
Exactly.
when I think of my basic purpose when I first started my channel is just to tell my story and offer some sort of assistance for anyone who wants it. You
Yeah.
know, it is challenging to keep going,
Mhm.
um, but I just every time I think about leaving and just walking away, I just think, no, I can't. I
Yeah,
gotta
and then
keep
I think of
going.
something else. I think, Jeff, I talked to Jeff and I'm like, "Jeff, we need to we need to do a live on this. Jeff, this is we gotta do this."
Yeah,
Because
and
it's just
honestly,
there's so much. Yeah.
Andrea hears that all the time too. I'm like, "Oh, I should do a live on this," and it's like, it's not
Yeah,
enough time in the day.
exactly. Oh, there you go. Somebody gifted a membership.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much, Kelly H. And we also, let's take a little bit of a breather here. Send a
Okay.
thank you to Haggis Basher for the hugs ahead of time and the super chat. I appreciate
Oh,
that. I am starting some comments as we're going along. I'm just
okay.
trying not to interrupt the conversation too much.
Yeah, once we get a flow
But
going.
yeah. And I do like Kathy's comments, though, as I often do. And
Mhm.
going back to what you were just talking about, sometimes it's just knowing you're not alone is helpful.
Exactly. 'Cause you think you're nuts. I mean, when you come out of a crazy cult, you do think you're nuts. Let me tell you.
Yes.
How did I actually get sucked into this? Those were a lot of the thoughts that went through my head. Yeah, like you feel like you were bamboozled. And there is
Hmm.
a loss of your own ability to make decisions. There's that kind of loss as well that I actually had to grieve, um, because in when I was in the cult, I made decisions like snap and pop all the time. You had to. You had to as at
Snap
you
and
know
pop.
what I mean? Snap and pop, sorry.
Scientology terms.
Yep. Is it really a Scientology term, though?
I don't know. I've never heard anybody outside Scientology say it. I
Yeah,
actually kind of
well,
wonder if
snap
it's in
and
the
pop.
tech dictionary.
But so yeah, so you're always making decisions, and you have to. You're put on the spot as a staff member. Um, Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. Most of the time people think you're wrong, so then you get, ethics conditions slapped on you or some form of punishment, right?
Yep.
And then you come out and you go, "Well, I made a pretty shitty decision joining a cult." I mean, this is for somebody who joined. Um, I don't know what it would be like for a second gen because I'm not, so I can only speak from my own experience. But you go through a loss of time as well. It was like I would sit there and think about 26 years of my life I've just flushed down the toilet.
Yep.
I could have been,
Believe me, I
and
know.
when I got out, I was also older. So, I'm so happy that a lot of the second gens got out when they were younger, because there was still an opportunity to go back to school and have a career and stuff like that, right? Not that
Yep.
I couldn't have done that, but I was in a lot of debt. We were in a lot of debt, and that's what I spent my time just working my ass off building a cleaning company to pay off all that debt. And then
Mhm.
and I never did any sort of recovery stuff, so I kinda did things backwards. I probably should have done some, you know, work on myself, but whatever. It is what it is. I can't turn back time.
Nope.
But,
Not OT9 yet, so,
damn.
yeah. Um, okay. So I think one other aspect to, grief in Scientology that I know I've had to overcome, and perhaps the same to you as well, is
Mm,
that the myth that it's important to be strong or
mm,
not have a reaction in the face of loss. So experiencing loss and grief and what have you is a weak aspect of your personality, and crying is weak. It's still something I deal with.
yeah,
I don't think it's unique to Scientology by any means, but it is something in Scientology where, especially staff members and Sea Org members, you're on post, and the reference is no case
the
on
case on
post.
post.
It's actually a crime to have case on post.
That's true too, yeah.
Yes, like, not a misdemeanor, not a little thing, I don't
No, a
think. I think
crime.
it's actually classified as a crime.
Yes, it
So,
is.
you show up to post, you've had a bad day, you've just lost someone, whatever you're grieving over, and you just have to set that completely aside and get on with it. That
Yeah,
seems wrong.
yeah.
So,
Can
would
I
you say
just bring
that's
something up for 1 second?
yes, for sure.
I'm
Did you wanna
sorry
read it
you're
or do you want me to read it?
struggling.
Yeah.
She says,
So,
I'm on the struggle bus today. I'm grateful for the community this morning.
it's good,
I'm
I'm
glad
glad,
you're here.
and we're grateful you took the time to listen or watch.
Yeah, I hate that struggle bus. I really, really do. I wish it would just, like, pull into the station and just stay there.
Yeah. Sometimes my bus breaks down, and
Yeah,
I'm just sitting there, and I can't get off because the bus driver won't let me off because we're in between stations, but
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, my husband would let you off because he used to
Yeah,
drive a
he would.
bus in
That's
Vancouver.
true. If I was on his route,
He wouldn't let you struggle on the bus.
no, and I appreciate
He
it.
actually used to have a lot of fun with his passengers. He had a standing ovation once on his bus.
Really?
Believe it or not, yeah, I don't remember what the circumstances were, but he also used to, after he got out of the cult, he also used to drive by the church in on Hastings Street in Vancouver, and he would point out that that is the Church of Scientology and to never go in there.
You know, they just make enemies of everybody, and you wonder why they're struggling, right?
Yeah,
Like,
Yeah.
everything they do is to it wrecks relationships and reputation with them.
Yeah.
If they would just leave people alone and stop destroying families, they might actually expand.
Yeah.
But no, they have to do themselves in. They must have so many suppressive people on the lines at the orgs,
Didn't you
because
ever
that's the
wonder about
policy.
the yeah, didn't you ever wonder about the 1 percenters? Or 2.5%?
2.5%.
2.5%. Like, how could I would go like, everybody is basically suppressive who is outside the doors of Scientology, all the psychs, and I remember thinking to myself, "I think that's more than 2.5% of the population."
Well, there's 2.5% are truly suppressive.
Truly
The other
suppressive.
20% are simply PTS, and then 80% of the population aren't PTSs. That's not to say that they aren't, and this is where it gets confusing. It's not to say that they aren't
Mhm.
PTS to an actual PTS suppressive person who's in the valence of being
Yes.
a suppressive.
Stop.
When
It's
you
just
really
like
sit down to think about it, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
it doesn't,
Because
and
because
I
literally
hated it.
everybody gets sick, right? Every single individual on the entire
Exactly.
planet, all 8 point whatever billion people, I forget how
Yeah,
many people there are, but it's around there,
yeah,
get sick. Therefore, they are PTS. But only 20% of the population is PTS
yeah,
per Scientology,
yeah.
and 2.5% are suppressive. So
The math doesn't add up.
the math is not mathing, as the
No.
SB chef loves to point out. And to Samuel, if you're watching this on the replay crew, hello.
Hi, Samuel.
Um,
We do our live soon.
yes. Yeah, Gabe and Samuel and I are gonna do a threesome. Um, a live threesome. Oh shoot. Okay.
I'm too old for that.
Typical tangents. I tell you, we're going really off topic here.
Oh, dear.
Actually, there might be a lot of grieving if there's a threesome happening online here live. So, uh, okay, here's an important one for me.
I have to stop laughing. Come on,
So
this
you're
is
crying
serious.
because you're sad, and now you're crying because you're laughing. This is good.
Okay. Okay,
All
stop.
right, put your TRs in, knock it
Okay.
off. Um,
Mm.
so for me, this is a big one. If you don't cry, it means you aren't sorry about the loss.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so crying is a normal response to sadness, but it's not the only response to sadness. And those who cry may feel the pain just as deeply as others. Sorry,
Mm,
those who don't cry may
mm,
feel the pain just as deeply as others.
yep.
They may simply have other ways of showing it. For me, I tend to get angry and frustrated over
And hit
loss,
tables.
hit tables and break my fist and make it
Oh,
goofy hand. Um,
good for tea
yeah,
drinking.
so I'm not a crier. I'm not. It's not what I like to do. It's not how I express myself. I did cry when my mom died last year, and that was actually probably the first time I had ever cried because of a big loss.
Wow.
Like,
Wow.
yeah, but that was a bit more of an emotional situation.
That's huge.
It is, yeah. But like, I mean, like the lead up to it was more emotional. So there was more of I know this is happening, and I was getting close to her, and we were talking and stuff. So I understand why the reaction was different.
That's hard, eh?
Um, yeah, it was definitely hard. But normally I'm not a crier. Normally I'm f this, or
Yeah.
I try and
My
take
reaction is
control of the
anger.
situation. Yeah,
I hear you.
yeah, yeah. So I think that's important to recognize, and then I will go over a few different ways that you may feel or experience loss. So, shock and disbelief is one way that
Mhm.
people experience loss, and kind of it resonates with them. Sadness is obviously the most commonly experienced, I would say.
Mhm.
You may feel guilt or regret in the face of loss or grief. Fear. I mean, if you lose someone like a close person, like your partner, or a child, you might fear the future and fear like, what are you going to do? You know,
How about getting out of
losing
a
a
cult?
job, getting out of a cult, and then anger, obviously, which we just discussed.
Yeah.
So for leaving Scientology, like you mentioned earlier, when you deal with Scientology, all the answers are there. You never have to make a decision.
Yeah.
It's just kind of laid out as a certainty. And is one thing that I've learned since, being out here is there is no certainty out here. There is nothing that
Exactly.
will work for everybody. There's no response to anything specifically that is universal.
I
And
hated
as I'm
that.
studying, yeah, and as I'm studying psychology, probably one of the most things that causes me the most fear in becoming a practitioner is, well, my certainty in the topic because there's so much to learn,
Yeah.
way more complicated than Scientology, but also choosing the right intervention for someone who is dealing with this stuff because there are so many different options, and that's I have a lot of anxiety about that. Like it's very palpable for me.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying, Jeff. I remember, um, another, therapy session that I had, like, that was more like um I always for cognitive behavioral therapy
Hmm.
session, and I had expected it to, you know, to go a certain way, like, okay, like when you're doing a session, you have questions, you're asked questions and then you answer them. And every session usually goes the same way, right? There's things that you do in the very beginning. You fly the rudiments, make sure all the upsets are cleared away. Then you actually do the process, and then there's all the stuff you do after. Well, in normal psychology or everyday psychology isn't like that. Like when I had the grief counseling, that was different. That was like, she would say, "Feel the grief here." I can't remember exactly what she was, but it was very loose and casual and stuff like that. And it was the same with the other session too. It's like I was waiting for structure. I was waiting for a command. I was waiting to be told what to do, and then I would respond to that. It's really fucked up,
Yeah.
because you're so programmed into thinking that. And then, it was so strange. And it's the same with everything else. When you get out, you're just so used to your one way or another. It's black or it's white. There's no shades of gray. And that was like really, really hard to deal with. And then trusting your own decisions. And those are all things that I I would go, I don't like this.
Mm.
I can understand why some people would go back to Scientology because it's very structured. You don't have to think. And yet, and
Yeah.
it's harder. It is harder to make these decisions. You kind of are putting yourself more at risk, I guess. Or I mean, people who've never joined a cult wouldn't really get it because they're always doing it. They're always making those tough decisions. Buying a car, for instance. Like my husband and I we were like, it took us 3 years to decide to buy a car and then what car to buy. 3 years. Like, that's
Wow.
a long time to be making a stupid decision about a dumb car. I mean, we did make the best decision because we really love our car, but there's
Yeah.
just you have so much doubt. So it's such a huge, for me anyways, it's a huge loss to lose huge loss to lose, whatever. Um, you lose
Okay.
certainty. You
Yeah.
lose that kind of certainty, which is also which is also security. Because when you're certain about yourself, you know, "Man, I know what's going on. I feel secure."
Yeah.
So yeah, so now you're almost vulnerable. You're kind of you're anything can go now, and that's scary.
Yeah, absolutely. The uncertainty of life all of a sudden being thrust upon you, in my case, as an adult,
Yeah.
for the first time is shocking. You think you have all the answers, and your
Yeah.
ego and your worth, um, your life's purpose, everything is wrapped around this one thing, this one idea.
Mhm.
And to have that gone, where do you go
It's
from there?
weird. Exactly.
Right?
You have
Like
to pick up
there
the
is nothing.
pieces. Right.
There's nothing that compares either.
Nope.
I'm gonna go get a job and I'm gonna, I don't know, learn how to make a new fancy doohickey. So what?
Yeah.
Like, and I think about that, and I like one of the biggest things that I've had to kind of get over, in entering a family, which is actually cares for each other and has, a really
Mm.
good dynamic, is getting over the idea of being PTS to the middle class, that typical, and I'll just briefly describe it, the idea that, achieving things in life, like going to school and getting a car and having kids and the white picket fence, that whole idea of what's kind of the standard
Yeah.
for a middle class lifestyle. If you're chasing after that, that means that you are PTS to the middle class. Like
Mhm.
you're worried about that more than anything else. And so when I look at people like that before, I'm much better now, but
Yeah.
I would almost look down on them. It's like, "Pff, you're wasting your life.
Mhm.
What good does that do?"
Yeah. And it doesn't
And
have
I'm definitely,
meaning.
yeah, it's, or the meaning is just like so insignificant and so
Exactly.
first and second dynamic oriented that it can't be good, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that's one thing that, it's something it took me a while to realize about myself, and that I was doing that, that I was
Yeah.
judging people for that. And then I kind of look at my life. I'm like, well, shit, I didn't do anything. I don't have, I don't have RSPs. I don't,
Yeah.
I'm not good with money. I don't have a house. Like, and I realized all this stuff about myself. I'm like, well, I'm kind of the loser here, in real
You know,
life.
that reality sets in, eh?
Yeah, and then you have
But
to,
you're
you're like,
not
"Oh,
a
shit,
loser.
well, where do I go?"
Yeah.
Not most of the time.
You're never
But,
a loser.
it's the shift in focus, and it's a stark difference between having everything all figured out and then having it all ripped out from underneath you, and that's a big loss.
It's huge.
Yeah, and it happens
It's
to every
huge.
single Scientologist.
Mhm.
Every single one of them will experience this to some degree at some point,
Yeah.
you know?
It sucks.
So,
But with
but
time, it does I think the pitfalls or the down points, the little dips, they do get a little less, or at least
mhm.
you spend a little less time in them
Yep,
as you progress and educate yourself, which kinda would be a good way to segue into the recovery stuff maybe.
sure,
Um
yeah.
And I have something hilarious to talk about.
Ooh,
We'll sort of bring it up. So,
let's
I mean,
bring it up.
I've done a few things in terms of recovery. Mostly, I mean, YouTube was huge. Um, listening to Aaron, and his channel, listening to, Chris Shelton, even though he's a big poo-poo right now. Um, that was helpful. Everybody who has put themselves out there on a channel and has brought something to the table that has helped, no matter whatever, no matter their personalities. This,
Yeah.
um, they have contributed to my recovery in some way or another. And I am grateful for that because I don't know if any other cult really has it. I think Jehovah Witnesses might, but there is a very strong um, individuals who have brought some very helpful information just specifically to ex-Scientologists, which I'm very grateful for. Also, like reading some books about mind control and stuff like that. Other people's stories. I read Jenna Miscavige. Her book was the first one I read.
Mm.
Um, so and then doing some other courses and understanding stuff about coercive control, that kind of stuff. I think yoga actually helped me, although I'm very inconsistent with yoga. I really should be better at it, but that actually helps. Meditation, that's helped me, but I've just sort of like done like little bits and pieces of stuff. And then also trying to create my a happy environment. That to
Mhm.
me is huge, like inside the house. So like Chuck, Chuck, he's my husband. He was in the cult for 40 years. So it's and I think I might do a live, maybe even by myself on this, but it's different when two people who have left a cult are trying to recover or sort of pick up the pieces from it. He hasn't so much dived into all the recovery stuff that I have. And then, well, I mean, he got this crazy pancreatic cancer stuff, and that was a huge thing that we had to deal with, which took me down a different road too of
Mm.
because having a life-threatening illness or and being the spouse of somebody who could possibly die, that's a whole other creature.
Yeah.
But let me tell you about this really cool thing I just did the other day. It's
Let's
called
hear it.
laughing yoga. If any you got Google it or do something, but it was, like, really weird, really awkward. I kinda felt stupid doing it, but in the end, it was actually fun. So, basically, there's this woman instructor, and she's doing all these little exercises, and she's making you laugh. One of them was, like, to take all your problems and put them in your hand, take them out of your head, put them in your hand, like, all imaginary stuff, right? And then
Mhm.
put them back in your head, and then do the same with the other and put it back in your head, and then you go like this, and you grind you grind out your problems into your hand, and
It's so
you
much different when when I can see you talking about it, because you told me about it, was it yesterday or whatever?
yeah.
And now I'm seeing you do this. I'm like, "Okay, okay." Does it come out your mouth or your nose or
It's supposed to come out your mouth.
Oh,
So,
okay.
I mean, that alone, so there's, like, a bunch of people in this room doing that, and it's
Yeah.
just like doing this little silly childish thing was so funny. But, yeah,
Mhm.
she would just, you would just, like, have to laugh on command kinda thing. So and apparently it's when you're laughing and you're happy, it turns on all the love hormones or the happy hormones, right?
Yeah.
Your endorphins and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's like that was a fun thing to do. I experienced it. I had fun and I felt better. So, I mean, I'm not into like a lot of big new aged holistic kind of stuff, but a little bit here and there just to sort of put a different perspective on life was fun to do. Anyway, so that's sort of been my recovery. It's been a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I will say too, not Scientology related, but definitely also Scientology related as far as recovery goes.
Mhm.
Janice Selby, who's a counselor here in Kelowna in British Columbia,
Yeah.
and we attend a group counseling, or not counseling, but a group support group with her.
Yeah.
She's a very good friend and a colleague, and um, she left a Mennonite Pentecostal, she calls it Mentecostal group. You can actually find her podcast. It's called Divorcing Religion on YouTube. She interviews amazing people.
Yeah.
But when her and I were talking about when she left her very high control group, um, she experimented with a lot of stuff,
Mhm.
and um, she wasn't allowed to do all this stuff in the cult she was in. Very high control, very purity culture type stuff. And so she went to town on experiencing life and different things. And she was able to find what works for her. She found her own boundaries and values and so forth based on herself and not her group. And I think similar to what you're talking about, trying this goofy, at the time feeling like it's kind of goofy thing and just
Mhm.
experiencing it for what it is and not what Scientology would say it is, which is another practice that
Yeah,
will
exactly.
simply key you in and make you worse and make you spin and whatever. I think that's a really powerful thing to do for yourself, and as well as very helpful for the recovery process.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, so I think that's great, and I appreciate you sharing that fun story. That was good. I like the
Yeah.
visual of it too. That's much
Yeah,
better.
I had to show you.
I know, I know. I'm glad you did.
Do you wanna do some
Um,
start stuff,
yeah,
or is there
and I'll
anything
I'll
else?
just make one comment just on my own
Absolutely.
recovery as I'm being stared at by Raz on the floor here.
Uh-oh.
Uh, Getting a dog has been very good recovery, but,
Yep.
I think education for me has been the most important, not
Mhm.
just what I'm doing now, but, watching other, YouTubers or reading books and so forth about what Scientology really is and what it does has been really important. And that's been my biggest part of my recovery.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
education is huge, isn't it? And look what you're doing now. You're unraveling shit like crazy, I'm sure.
Uh, I really should just do a whole live on
Mm.
how challenging this studying is, not just learning the new stuff, but also unlearning all the shit that I've had in my brain for so long.
Yeah. You need a
It's
session of
just
false data
so
stripping.
I do. I do. It's so challenging. It really is.
Yeah,
But that's for another time.
yeah.
Um, all right. Well, let's go back to kind of near closer to the beginning of our live when we're talking about loss assists. Looks
Mhm,
like SP Crusader Leany had a metered assist
mhm.
when they lost their dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I've never had one of those. Maybe I haven't had a big enough loss in Scientology when I was
You're
in.
not missing anything, dear. Don't worry about it.
I hated going on the meter.
Me too.
Just hated it. I must have been suppressive.
Yep.
Although I never rock slammed, so how can I be suppressive if I never rock slammed? That doesn't make sense. Why don't things make sense in Scientology?
Don't even try to make sense
Ah,
of it. Oh, what's
I
this?
know. Also
Oh,
also from Leany SP Crusader, comment, I knew my grief was over on Scientology when I got 3 days of protesting at the IS event and didn't feel feel it at all.
wow.
I did cry before the first day, I bet you did. I think I
Yeah.
was emptying the drain 12 years out. That's amazing, and
Wow.
congratulations. Well, directly above grief is numb, so maybe that's why you didn't feel anything. Maybe the tone scale is right.
Oh my god.
Oh, man. Did I just prove Scientology works?
No, don't worry about it.
We'll blame Leany.
Yeah.
Alright. LEH. It is human and most animals'
Mhm.
instinct to grieve the loss of someone you share a bond with.
Yeah.
I mean, Raz does that every time I leave the house.
It's true.
It's just like, we're going out by ourselves. Oh,
I
I'm never
know.
gonna see you again.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the dog's mind.
yeah. Humans naturally care for and protect others. Church of Scientology desires robots, pretends to
Yes.
care in order to recruit.
Yeah,
Fact.
more or less.
I will say though that a lot of Scientologists do care.
Yeah.
Scientology itself does not, and it doesn't teach people to care. But there are a lot of very caring people in Scientology that I wish would spend their time elsewhere helping people for real.
Yeah, they don't know how to really care.
Yeah,
Their care is putting somebody in session after they lost somebody,
yeah. Scientology
right?
can help you with that.
Or writing up overts and withholds when
Yeah.
whatever the circumstances. That's what they think is help.
Yep. Then they really do believe it for sure.
Yep.
MacMeister Toronto. Hello, Kim. Question: have either of you found that since leaving Scientology that you've experienced delayed grief?
Mhm.
Yes. And are you uncomfortable expressing the grief? What do you think, Gabe?
Well, yes, delayed grief as I um sort of progress or peel more of the layers off. I find that I grieve over different other things now. So I would say that's delayed grief. Um, I cry way more now than I ever have. I mean, that also could be menopause. Could be, I don't know.
Maybe, maybe.
Maybe,
Where's
possibly.
that on the tone scale?
Yeah,
Menopause.
exactly. Menopause, miss emotion. Um, and then uncomfortable expressing the grief. No, I pretty much let it rip, but I keep it under my roof.
Mm.
I like when we were doing this yoga, laughing yoga yesterday, at the very end, they played this song or this song that was super very calming, and there was words. And I just as I start thinking of these words, I will start to cry. It's just
What words are
crazy.
they?
It's I'm safe, I'm calm, and I'm
Oh,
relaxed. It's this
wow.
safe thing that was like, it's happening again. Feeling safe is a really big thing for me. Feeling
Yeah.
like safe that nobody will harm me. That's, I think, part of the hypervigilance and childhood trauma shit, right? Eh,
Yeah.
just a word can set me off. Anyways, thanks, Kim.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks, Kim. Well, thank you, Gabe, for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah,
Yeah.
anytime you can get a tear out of me.
Flatten that button.
Yeah,
Um, and honestly, like that would be here's a little side point on that.
yeah, yeah.
So if you were in doing TRs, or even if you were on post, and any time that someone said the word that triggered you, which I won't say now, but
Yeah.
someone said that word and got a reaction out of you, you would have to go and drill that so you didn't respond anymore to that, right? Like that
Mhm.
would it's bull baiting because you're creating an emotional response. A lot of people think that bull baiting is just like if you say a word or a phrase and you get angry um, or
Yeah.
just respond in a kind of attacking way or laughing or whatever. But if you start crying and in a bull bait session, you got to keep flattening that. So you're just
That's true.
constantly pushing that trigger until
Yeah.
you just hammer
Stop.
that button down, which is not healthy.
No. I've never experienced that kind of thing in mine was laughing.
Yeah, well, most are. But you
Yeah.
know what? Fear is a big
Oh,
one too.
fear
Like
and
people would
anger.
like, yeah, if I like there would be a grown adult man screaming at a child,
Mhm.
calling them names, threatening them, in a
Yeah.
very angry tone,
Yeah.
and this would result in a very scared child. But you got to keep going through it until the supervisor says you have no reaction,
Yeah,
you know?
that's abuse.
Yeah.
That's
And
clearly abuse. The
and this
thing
happens every day.
Yeah, it's gross.
Yeah.
Um, well, the other thing is even 2 little kids that bull bait each other, they call each other names, they're bullying each other,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Um, but I remember doing, the drills, and, usually it would be a guy. Girls I was always fine with, but if a guy is calling me names, I get really angry, and yeah, that was my thing. It's like, don't even or insults and criticisms.
Yeah.
Like, you have to sit there and take it, and I never took it very well.
I bet you didn't. All right, let's move on.
Yes.
SP Crusader again, Leany. I think every action, every story is slowly unpicking the stitches holding Scientology together.
Ooh, that's a really good
I like that
analogy. I like that.
analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, good one. Thank you. Peter Anderson, math 8.2 billion people in the world as of 2024 times
Times
2.5% is that 205 million SPs
Yeah.
worldwide.
Yeah, I don't
And
think
then
so.
no, probably not. I mean, that's insane. Well,
Yeah, but I don't yeah,
also like psychiatrists and SPs are like from another planet, right? So,
right.
although aren't we from another planet too? I'm
Yes,
so
we're on a
confused. I'm
prison
so
planet.
confused. Like,
We're all the bad guys. We're all the, misfits,
yeah, yeah.
criminals.
Uh,
Yes.
Helicopter. The TRs are so effed up.
Yes, yes. I hated
Fact.
them. I hated them.
Yeah. But I always felt it as a sense of strength and pride when I was in that I could just
Take
keep my
anything.
TRs in. So
Invincible.
strong. I'm so strong. My shield of invincibility. It's
Yeah,
just not healthy. Kathy, she says, I am a
I'm a
crier.
crime. My
My brother
brother
isn't.
is. Yeah, I think guys process that kinda stuff differently too.
I
Although
would, I
my
would,
husband cries now more so than he ever has,
mm,
which
I
is
would say
interesting.
societally, um, people who
Yes.
identify as male or whatever are conditioned to not cry.
Yeah,
Like there's a lot of toxic masculinity where if you cry, you're lesser or you're a woman or whatever, and it's seen as degrading in
yeah.
that term, which is 100% not true. I think guys should just cry all they darn well want, if they want. If they
It's
don't want, then that's
strange.
fine too.
It's strange seeing a guy cry, though, because there's
Yeah,
also the stigma or whatever, the social acceptance of seeing a man crying. It's w it
yeah,
shows weakness, right? But in all
yeah.
honesty, it's fine. Like, I mean, my dad, he was masculine. I rarely saw him cry until he got older.
Mm. I remember the first time my dad cried in front of me. It was
Yeah.
because his car got broken into again, and they stole his stereo system, which he loved. And I
Oh,
walked into his room, and he was crying, and he was
jeez.
so embarrassed that he was crying. Uh,
Really?
yeah, he did not want me to see him crying. I don't know if it was just being strong or what. I never talked to him about it afterwards, but I was pretty young. I was like 11 or 12, I think. But
Yeah.
they kept knowing that he was replacing his stereo equipment, so they just kept coming and breaking into the car and stealing it all. Like all of it. And I'm talking like
That
a really
oh,
high end. My dad, he loved his car audio
yeah.
stuff, right?
Oh god. Was that, like, down by the org?
No, no, it was outside of our house.
Oh, that's in Vancouver. Yeah.
Yeah, it would happen while he was sleeping. So, anyway,
Yeah.
side story. Will's pickle jar scar, Crystal. My condolences on your loss, Jeff. I think referring to my mom. Thank you.
Mhm.
I'm also glad for you that you were able to deal with her loss in a more healthy way than
Mhm.
Sciento mind effery.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was also able to apologize to my mom as well for having
Ugh.
disconnected from her uh, when I was
Mm.
14, and she said she never blamed me and forgave me the day before she passed away finally. So
Oh God, Jeff.
yeah, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
Adam, it's yet another miserable hypocrisy that Hubbard's every emotional outburst was indulged, but everyone else had to be a robot.
Hmm.
Yeah, he was crazy. Like when you hear him going off on people, yelling at them and stuff, I have like clips of it. It's nutty, man.
Yeah.
He put this persona up front, and Scientology still does. But he was just abusive, absolutely
Hmm.
abusive.
He was.
Ah,
What's this?
Crystal again. Interesting to hear you were, after leaving the cult, finding value and importance in what non-Scientos perhaps consider basic necessities. Yeah.
Crazy, huh?
I mean, we know people who've sold homes to support the org, and um, you sell stuff. Nothing means anything. Anything in the physical universe doesn't mean anything to
Yeah.
Scientologists. It's not
You can.
important. It's just
Yeah. You can
fleeting.
make it again.
This this body doesn't mean anything. It's just a piece of the messed universe
Hmm.
and can be discarded
But some
like
of them sure like
trash.
to drive their BMWs around and then Mercedes, right? There was
Only
there
the
was
ones that
that.
are making lots of FSM commissions.
That's right. Only ones that are really scamming a lot of people, like the wise groups.
It's okay to scam a lot of people if you're also giving the money to Scientology. But if
Absolutely.
you're scamming people and keeping it for yourself, no, no, no. Not
No.
cool. Not in Scientology's eyes. All right, last question here, also from Crystal. I believe our minds are incredibly powerful. Absolutely. Visualization of grinding stuff out of your head and spitting out your mouth. No.
Yeah.
Visualization practices can be helpful. My mom taught me to place my worries in an imaginary hand, to turn
Uh-huh.
them over and let them go. That's cool.
That is
And it
cool.
actually helped. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Funnily enough,
It
when you were
yeah.
telling me about this whole put stuff in your hand and head, it just made me think of Scientology practice to
Oh, the
put
ashtray?
attention into a wall.
Oh, yeah.
And it's basically to the point of it in Scientology is to increase your anchor points or your space. Because if you're sad or low toned, you're like you're in your little bubble, your little cocoon, and by putting your attention elsewhere, you're opening yourself up, which is supposed to bring you more uptone. Whoops, according to
Mhm.
Scientology. So
Yeah. There's
yeah.
there's a lot of that kinda stuff in new age religions and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot
And
of
I'm not
it
saying any of
and
it works or doesn't work. I think, like I said earlier, there are
yeah,
so many different things
yeah,
and everyone's so unique. Everyone's
yeah,
experience is different. And it's important to just try all kinds of different methods and see what works for you. I think
yeah.
that's the most valuable thing that one can do, you know?
Exactly. And the thing is you can splurge on it when you're not in a cult.
Hmm.
You can do whatever the fuck you wanna do.
There is literally no therapist that's gonna be like, are you doing cognitive behavioral therapy while you're trying to do, uh, other types of therapy?
Yeah,
That's not okay. It's like,
yeah,
you're not gonna say that, you
yeah,
know? Are you seeing a
yeah,
psychiatrist and a
eh,
psychologist? Are you going to a naturopath at the
yeah,
same time as you're
exactly.
seeing, you know? It's just like,
Yeah,
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 it
you're
just
not
do
a
what you gotta
squirrel in the
do.
real world.
Yeah, there is no such thing as a squirrel, except for the squirrels that are on trees that Raz likes to catch, or try
Oh
to
my
catch
god,
anyway.
and
Do you know
Charlie
that
goes
Raz
nuts
tries
over.
and climbs trees? He'll try and climb the tree, but he's a dog, so he can't.
No,
And, yeah, he'll never get that squirrel.
Charlie just barks like he it's like a howl, a high
Mm.
pitched, really, really high pitched howl when he sees these things, and he sees them from the living room window, and he goes mad. It's really
You should
funny.
record that and post a video of it.
I should. Hey, there's one quick comment I wanted to bring up here.
Sure. Oh, that's a good one. Weaknesses is not a character fault. It's a superpower.
Yeah.
Well, then I am Superman.
And I'm
All right,
Superwoman.
Gabe.
Yeah,
Yes,
darling.
you are. Thank you very much for joining me on this amazing chat. I love you.
I love you too,
Um,
Jeffy.
Also, thanks for everyone who watched and put comments in the chat. And if you're on the replay crew, thanks for joining. I feel honored to be able to do this kind of thing and share my experience with all of you. If you have gotten value out of this conversation, please make sure you give a like and a subscribe and maybe a share, and then
Yeah,
watch one of our other videos as well.
yeah. That'd be
I think we'll be
awesome.
back next week, maybe even this week for a threesome with Samuel. Who knows? Whenever that's going to happen. Thanks for
On that
watching.
note,
Yeah. Have a good day.
see ya.